So welcome, Bill Rancic. Thanks for joining us here in Austin, Texas. What are your initial thoughts about your visit so far?
Well, first, thank you for having me. And I've known you for a few years now, and I'm so glad you're doing this because out of all the guys I know, you're the one guy that everyone comes to for advice and for wisdom. And they always say, what a great guy Cal is. I mean, I've not met anyone who isn't just immediately enamored with you and just thinks the world of you. So I'm glad you're doing this because I think this is going to be beneficial to a lot of men out there who are going to listen to this. So I congratulate you on that. And my initial visit to Austin is, I love it. You know, I've been here a few times, usually just in and out. You know, I was here, I think it was in April for 24 hours for a speaking event, but I've never really spent any meaningful time and I've never really toured around. So today I spent the whole day touring around with our mutual friend, Ben. And it seems like a really cool city with a great vibe, great energy.
Yeah, that's been, you know, we've been here a little over 6 years, as I was telling you earlier. And it's just been, that's been our experience is the people here really make it. I mean, there's a lot to do, right? It's beautiful country, the hill country, but even as you're trying to find your group, right? Your tribe, your people, there's just this sense of comfort here that everything's going to be okay, right? Even if it's just you, G, and Duke making your way around the city for months or whatever, like you just know you're in a good place. People are very friendly. People are doing their own thing. They really do keep it weird here. You know, it's really, what I've loved is, I love how we kind of stand out without having tattoos, right? Or piercings. Like it's really, you know, everybody's welcomed here. And it's, I think we felt that from the moment we got here. And then more recently, just being able to find, you know, each of us, both Peyton and I, finding our men and women that we really connect with has really taken our experience here to another level. So it's been really cool.
And this is your forever place, you think?
For now, it is.
For now, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's really right now a better fit for us. Certainly where the kids are in their ages. And I mean, the Austin airport isn't like O'Hare where you can get everywhere, but I'm okay connecting. Like it's a really low maintenance airport, and the food there is awesome too. So
and there's live music, I think. I heard today. Yeah, no, it's a very manageable airport. And when you're coming to a paradise like this, you don't mind connecting.
No, that's right.
And you've got great weather. And I think, you know, one of the things that we share is that we both have lived in Chicago. And I think, you know, Chicago has great architecture and great food, but at the end of the day, it's the people that makes that city. And I think it's very similar here in Austin. You know, it's a cool city and it's got great food and, you know, you've got a lot of great benefits. But at the end of the day, if the people aren't good, I don't care where you're at. You're not going to want to live there. And there's some amazing places in the world that I've been to that I could never live in because of the people. Yeah, well, I'm not going to name names.
Yeah, no, and we won't go there. But let's back up a little bit. I want the you know, because I know a little bit about your background, but let's share with the audience here kind of your upbringing and, you know, maybe a few things that really stand out for you that help shape you to who you are today.
You know, I think my parents, for one, I think that was very important. Growing up, you know, for me, it was okay to make mistakes. It was okay to have failures, but it was never okay not to try. And I think that's something that I really want to instill in my son, because I think today in the culture we're living in, so many parents are putting such tremendous pressure on these kids to always be a winner, to always have a perfect score. And that's not realistic. And therefore, these kids are no longer trying anymore. They don't want to venture and experiment new things because they're not going to be perfect at it. And, you know, for me, that was really what made me grow and made me, you know, the man that I am today. And I see some of these kids, especially on the coast, where I was somewhere recently and I saw a 7-year-old kid and his parents had gotten him a quarterback coach. You know, it's $250 an hour, and this quarterback, the kid's 7. And I thought to myself, oh my Lord, like, you know, he has to work out with a quarterback coach 3 days a week and he's 7 years old. I just don't, for me, that doesn't work. You know, I think you gotta feel your way in the dark. You gotta fall down. That's what builds you up. And I had a great, my great grandmother, my grandmother was great, I should say. My father's mother, she was very instrumental, and I spent a lot of time with her. And she was an entrepreneur herself. She had a little corner meat market when she was younger, and she kind of instilled that entrepreneurial spirit in me. And I used to spend weekends there a lot when I was a kid. And when I was 10, I was at my grandmother's one day, and she was, I'll never forget, she was in the kitchen making breakfast for me one morning, and I wanted to learn. And she taught me how to make pancakes. And I spent all day learning how to make different types of pancakes. And I just was in that kitchen all day. So I woke up the next morning and I invited all the old ladies who lived on my grandmother's block, and I invited them to come over for a pancake breakfast. And they loved it, right? This 10-year-old kid cooking these pancakes, serving them this, breakfast. And I don't know how good the pancakes were. But when they left, I was clearing the plates away from the table, and each one of those ladies left a $5 bill underneath her plate. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm onto something here. So I took the money and I put it in my pocket, and I didn't say a word to anyone, my sisters or my mom or my dad. And the week went by, and Friday afternoon when the school bus dropped me off in front of my house, I went running in the house and I demanded that my mom take me to my grandmother's for the weekend. And this went on for like 5 or 6 weeks. And then my mom found all this money hidden in my sock drawer, and she demanded to know where all this money came from. And I had to fess up that I was running a makeshift restaurant out of my grandmother's house. So she shut that operation down immediately. She claimed I was fleecing these old ladies out of their Social Security checks. But that was kind of my start, and it was really because of my grandma, and she encouraged that. And then my parents encouraged it as well.
Mm. And so if you could take one lesson from your experience of growing up with your grandmother, what would that be? I mean, if you could go a little bit deeper, then obviously she was an entrepreneur and provided this, kind of the kitchen and the atmosphere for you. Like, what do you think was the one thing you took away from your grandmother?
Well, I always asked a lot of questions. I was very inquisitive, and she never shut me down, right? If I wanted to learn about something, she ran with it. If I wanted to learn how to make pancakes, she took the time. And that's what I do with my son, Duke. Like if he wants to learn about planes, I take him, to look at planes, and we go to the airports, and, I really want to feed his hunger for knowledge. And I think that was one thing my grandma did with me. And no question was too silly, so she always encouraged me to ask a lot of questions, and not just with her, but with anybody. And I think that's something I see in my son now, which is great. He has no fear. He'll walk up and he'll go in the cockpit of a United plane and talk to the captain and say, "Where's the landing gear and where's this?" And sure enough, he can go in right now into any airplane and tell you the thruster, the landing gear, the altimeter, and he's 7 years old because he loves aviation.
Yeah, and I'll just attest to both you. You still have the curiosity, and so I know that you and I have had tons of conversations about working out and some other things, some working in principles that have been maybe more common lately. But your son Duke, like that kid, when you guys walk the loop and come by our house, he's always got great questions, and
your invisible fence,
right, and it was just like he just goes deeper than most any other kid, and you can tell that he's taking it all in, and
for sure.
And I've always, I appreciate that was something that Peyton really instilled in the kids and would always answer their questions. And so I don't know that I always would have been as open to it, but just watching, my wife show up for our kids that way. And, she loves nothing more than when Duke comes by with mom and dad and he's just got all these questions, right? And so super cool. But we talked about this earlier. The reason I thought it was important to have you on is you're a guy who's been super successful, right? You're in the public eye. People have seen you from The Apprentice, and very, written books. You do a ton of speaking engagements. We were having dinner this summer, and I saw a guy, right, who has all these things going for him, but was taking a step back and looking around, and he was starting to question things. Questioning maybe some of your own beliefs about how you were supposed to be, as a father, as a husband, as a man, maybe other people's ideas about what you're supposed to do, right, at your age. And you were asking a lot of questions to me that reminded me of a similar change that I've been going through, right? And I loved it, and I thought, not to say that there are right questions and wrong questions, but I really appreciated that I felt like you were going down the right path. And, I'd be interested for you to share with the audience just kind of what's been going on with you, maybe what life was like as Bill Rancic the last 5 years, what that maybe looked like and how you're wanting to shift it. And then maybe we'll talk about why you're wanting to shift it.
Yeah. I mean, I'll go even further than that. I'll go back like the last 15 years, right? Where I had started a business. I sold the business. I got on The Apprentice. I did 6 seasons of that show. I started out and I won the first season, then I became a judge. And I spent, 10 years living on the road. I was traveling anywhere from 150 to 250 days a year. So I was literally on an airplane several times a week and running, and gunning. And that was kind of the competitive person that I am. And I think it's a struggle because what makes you successful or what makes you find success in whatever you're doing is that competitive nature, right? In most cases. But when it's time to downshift, you have an internal struggle happening because, you're not running the race as fast as you can, or trying to articulate this properly because I've never really talked about this before, but it's definitely, you enjoy certain days where you're not as busy and not doing enough, but then you also have the other guy on the other shoulder saying, you need to get out there and what are you doing? You're on the sidelines, I like to play the game. I'd rather play, football than watch it. You know what I mean? I think a lot of people are like that. So for me, I still have that struggle today because I'm not working as much as I did. And that's by design. I mean, ever since our son came into this world, it changed everything, and we had a hard time having a child. It took us many, many years, to have a son. So I think I appreciate that gift much more than most people do. So I said, I'm gonna be all in on this. And I was fortunate. I had a great father. My father passed away in 1999 when I was in my 20s, but he was very hands-on. We went to breakfast 3 or 4 days a week, when I was a kid, he and I. So he was there. He was present. He showed up. He was a guy I could count on. And that's really my goal for my son. And there's a great song, and I let my son listen to it. It's by Zach Brown, and it's called My Old Man. And if you guys, you want to Google it one day, go ahead. But it's about a father who raises his son, and then his son becomes an adult, and then his son has a son of his own. And basically the theme of the story is, I'm trying to raise you the right way, the way my father raised me. And that's really, it's a song that I make, Duke and I listen to all the time, and he loves it. And I explain to him, why it's an important song to me, because my dad, did a great job, I think, raising me, and I want to be able to do that for you. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no.
Going in a million different directions.
No, and I think for me, I think that's the beauty of where you're at. It's uncharted territory, right?
Yeah.
And so you're trying to articulate it. You maybe don't have the words for it, but there's like this pull, I think, right?
Yeah.
This is what I've recognized, and I could be wrong, but this guy who has been in the match, right? The game. He's been running the race for at least since you were 10, maybe before that, right? I mean, in some way, like there was a game there and you saw this and you saw it in a different way. And now maybe those things, right? Which, I mean, there's patterning going on years and years and years, and there's been a lot of reward for these accomplishments, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Recognition, fame, money, like whatever, all the things that come with that. Right. And so what I saw was someone that said, well, those are great and they afford me a lot of opportunities. But if I'm doing all that, then it maybe is taking away from some other things that, as you said, your relationship with your family is very important, right? And so you're like, how do I do it all, right? And I think what you're recognizing is there's a downshifting, right? And so it's challenging. It's something that I've been through to some degree. I got out of trading I wasn't at the height of my game. Business wasn't great. I wasn't making that much money relative to how I had before. And so it almost...
Well, that industry had changed tremendously.
No, for sure. But it was like, it made it my exit much easier, right? And I also believed that I had the chapter 2 figured out, which was like going to get into fitness coaching. And I did that for a little bit, but it was more like a holdover until this kind of period of 2 or 3 years of really trying to figure out what that looks like. And so I've been in this space of not knowing,
Yeah.
and have really kind of surrendered to that in a way that's been beneficial for me. But the ripple effect is that I'm more connected to my wife, my kids now. I'm there. I'm not.
Well, you don't let your career identify you. And I think that's where a lot of men have trouble, is that that's their only identity. And when that's gone, they have nothing. And I think that's a shame, because at some point it's going to end for all of us. You know what I mean? So you better figure it out sooner rather than later, because if that's all you can identify, or if that's all you are is your career, then that's a pretty sad life, I think.
And it happens, right?
Of
it happens
course.
because
Yeah.
you're just taught from a young age that success looks like this, right? And it's all kind of the same, unfortunately, and it all has to do with money and the accumulation of things and homes and all that. And so a lot of us throw our hat into that ring, and if we're lucky, right, we have success there. And I think what's been cool is to see your consciousness wake up to that, right? And say, how do I balance it? Right? Because it's hard. It's hard. And
well, I think gratitude is one, and we talked about this briefly, but you have to have gratitude. You have to appreciate the present. You have to appreciate, the journey that you're on. And before we started rolling here, I said, when I was growing up, my mom always would say, the train doesn't get in the station, so you better look out the window and enjoy the ride. And I think that's very important. And, when you climb the mountain, most people, they get to the top of the mountain and then they look at the next mountain and they say, if I could only get to that peak, then I'd really be happy, God. And then they get to that peak and they want to get to the next one. And they never stop and look down and say, man, thank you, God, for letting me get up to here. This is amazing. They don't appreciate what they've accomplished. They just want to get to the next bigger and better thing. And that's with career too. It's money. God, if I could just make $1 million, then I'd really be happy. And they get the $1 million. And guess what? God, if you could just get me to 2 million, then I would really be happy. And it keeps going and going and going, and they never find happiness.
Yeah, it's true. And there's a famous study that basically states that, we have our basic needs, right? And once those basic needs are met, right? And so if you're living in poverty, that's a different story. The happiness meter is generally on the lower side. But once you get to middle class and above, the more money you make does not equate more happiness. It's basically the same across the board. And so, I think it's interesting. Those things can be motivating, right? I want to make the next, whatever the number is, right? And so it can keep you on there. And there are times when it can serve you really well, right? To grind, to put your head down. But if there's never that step away and to look around and to understand, again, speaking from my own experience, I know now, I didn't know at the time, and it wasn't too long ago, that I was so focused on doing the things like on paper as a dad and as a husband, making sure I was providing and I was there. I was at my kids' games, or I was picking them up at school and making sure I was doing all those things that
optically you were supposed to do, but you weren't present.
I wasn't. There was a missing connection to the whole experience.
I know so many people who do. They're just checking the box.
Yeah. Yep. And you think and you're getting praise from people on the outside. You're a great dad. Look at you. Look at all the time you're spending with them. Yeah. But all the while, there's other stuff running in the background. Yeah. And so, and we were talking with your wife, Juliana, about this earlier. It's like sometimes, or oftentimes, or certainly almost for me, almost every time, I need to live in that world kind of on the other side of the tracks where I'm kind of fucking it up, to understand that when I get back over and I can see where I was, like, oh yeah, I was there. I have an appreciation for being there. I have a greater appreciation that my family unit's still intact, right? But having that as a reminder of like where I don't want to be. And sometimes, for whatever reasons, because we are human, like we're trying to do the best we can, right? And so we do slip into these modes where we're not as present as we want to be. But as long as we have the awareness that we can come back to it, right? And everybody has their own modes of kind of coming back into presence. It could be meditation. It could be getting into cold water. It could be breath work. It could be going for a walk in nature. It could be having your shoes off in the grass in the sun. Like everybody has their ways, or should have their ways, right? To root into that presence, and that's, one of the reasons for the podcast is I think for a long time I never had those things. And as over the last couple of years, as I've learned about them and I've experienced them and played around with them and figured out the ones that work for me, and sometimes they work for me, this week, and something else is going to work next week. And, so I'm trying not to be too rooted in exactly what I should be doing, right? Just really playing off, what do I feel like? What is going to bring me back to the here and now?
When you were going from, the grinding phase to this new phase, did you ever hit a bottom? And if you did, what did that bottom look like? Because I think a lot of guys out there, we're too macho to talk about this. Like, you can't hurt me. I don't, I'm bulletproof, and that's not real. I mean, every guy, has highs and lows, and that's a fact. But what does your bottom look like?
I'd say I'll pick one of the bottoms, because there were several. But 2 years ago, and I've spoken about this before, but summer of 2017, up enjoying our summer, and I know this now upon reflection, but I was just not in a good place, and I didn't realize it, and I wasn't sure what I should be, what I was called to do. I had some ideas about what I should be doing, but what happened is we get up to Idaho for the 2 months, and my mentality is, well, I spend 10 months in Austin with the family. I'm going to spend the 2 months with the guys.
Yeah.
And so I played a ton of golf, 5-6 days a week. I had been sober for 8 or 9 years, and I had started drinking casually. That summer, it tipped over into more than casually. It was like every time I was on the golf course, having 3 or 4 drinks, cannabis, whether it was an edible or something like that. Hey, just to take the edge off while we're playing golf. And it was like every day what I was doing was numbing.
Yeah. Now,
if you looked at my Instagram, and you can, because it's still all there, I keep it there as a reminder of what can happen if I lose sight of why I'm here, right? I was doing some pretty cool shit. Our friend JJ it was a joke that summer. It was like I was on JJ's Make-A-Wish list. And it's like he was taking
I saw
me
you on the helicopter.
Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah.
Right. And so I got to do all these cool things, right? I played golf with MJ, was in a helicopter with him, and I played golf with like a bunch of the PGA guys. There was like 6 or 7 of us, and went to the Mayweather-McGregor fight. We had great seats. It was like one thing after another, right? And it was like, oh man, like what a life.
Yeah.
But like just emptiness inside.
Still weren't happy. It didn't make you happy.
No, and Peyton would be the first to tell you that it was just, she was not attracted to the guy I was becoming.
Yeah.
And so I would come home from these experiences. I was met with that wall from her. I'm coming in thinking I'm pretty cool. Like, look at the shit I'm doing. Look who I'm hanging out with.
Look at
right.
me and MJ.
Yeah. And she's like, no, you're going to come back to earth. You're a part of this family, and you're going to, again, it was more passive than that. But that was the message. And it wasn't until, that was the summer of 2017, October 1st of that year, I was in Las Vegas for the shooting. And, for the Route 91 Fest. And, that moment, I was there with a friend of mine, and as the shooter was shooting, like we were hiding behind a couple tour buses with a bunch of other people.
Wow.
And again, I've spoken about this before, so I'll kind of get right through it. But I had this notion, like if someone comes around the corner,
this is it.
Yeah, there's no one going to defend us.
Right.
And so I just surrendered at that moment. Like this could be it. And when it wasn't, something changed in my subconscious or unconscious. I'm not kind of smart enough around that to figure out which it was, but there was something that shifted in me. This is 2 years ago, where I started to wonder why was I there? Because I had done all the things I was supposed to do that they told me to do as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I had accomplished all those things, and I was largely unfulfilled, right? And it didn't make sense to me until I started to meet people who were on a similar path of finding out why are they here, And I've spoken about my friend Kyle Kingsbury often, but he was like the first person I met after that experience. It was 2 days later that opened me up to this world of, how to live in the present moment and what different modalities can get you there, right? Whether it's breath work, cold water, psychedelics, there are any number of ways to crack open into that. And I just went headlong into all of it. I needed to know because I needed answers. And so I guess to answer your question, that was kind of my rock bottom. And I was fortunate again that Peyton, though she was basically at the end of it, she's like, I can't, like, if this is what it is, I'm not going to do it anymore. Right. I got that kind of ultimatum. And being as unconscious as I was at that point, I was like, I don't understand. Like, I don't understand where this is coming from, but intuitively, like I knew something was wrong.
A surprise.
I just couldn't figure out how to fix it.
Yep.
And I didn't realize that I was such a broken person at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking at all the wrong things. I was looking for Instagram likes or these golf trips, or I was finding it in the bottom of a glass of wine or in a an edible or whatever, anything. It was in fitness too. Like I went balls deep into fitness, and that's just another way. It was another way for me to distract and escape. And so again, fortunately, I've kind of lived to tell about metaphorically that we Peyton and I made it through that experience. And it's been growth.
But it was a close call, it sounds like.
It was really close, like if I'm not in Las Vegas and have that, that shift in my soul that I didn't even know was happening, right? That questioning of like, why am I here? It's not to accumulate things because I've done that, and it's look at me now.
It's not the answer, right?
Yeah. So, and I'm curious about you. Like, what's something like for you where you maybe, because I look at it like, I know now that like I look at like I let myself down or I let people down, but it's all part of the growth. And I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is self-forgiveness is the thing that will carry us through. And you need to be kind to yourself in moments like that, because I was just broken.
Yeah.
I was doing the best I could with a broken spirit, and acting in ways that I'm not proud of.
Yeah.
But that's where I was.
Right.
Those were the tools that I had at that point. And so, I mean, what's something that for you that you're like, fuck, I really wish I handled that differently?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, my dad passed away when he was in his mid-60s, and I was in my 20s. And that was, for me, obviously life-changing. And he and I were very close. I just started to make money, and it was funny. I took him on a ski trip when I started to make some money, and because my dad loved skiing. Like, that was every year he planned an annual ski trip for me and my 3 sisters, and that was like he looked forward to it all year. So I took him skiing, and make a long story short, he fell, hurt his back. We found out that the back wasn't hurt because he fell; it was the cancer, and he had cancer that had spread. So, I made a vow to myself that, I'm going to let my dad live vicariously through me after he passed away. And I seized every opportunity, so that was why when this opportunity to come on The Apprentice. It was crazy. I would have never have done that, and to be on a reality TV show, it was like insane, right? This is in the early stages of reality television. This is in 2003.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to start doing things. I started developing real estate. I started just to do things that why not? What's the worst that could happen? And that for me really changed my life. It was something that I think about every day. And if I do die young, I want to make sure that, I live every day to the fullest and that I don't have any regrets. And I think that's what's helped me downshift a little bit easier, because, I'm 48 now. And, I always do the math. If my dad died at 65, it's pretty simple subtraction. So for me, that's important. And it's important to make sure that I don't have any regrets, and that I look back and that I've achieved the life that I wanted to achieve. And not necessarily from a financial or a materialistic standpoint, but more from a fulfillment, where I've been able to make a difference in the world. I've been able to, use the gifts that I've been given, and be a good steward with those gifts. And I think that's important. But certainly I've had ups and downs, you know what I mean? Not where I've been, knocking on death's door, so to speak. But, I've had a lot of highs and lows. And certainly it's been, the older I get, the harder it is sometimes when you're facing change and having to adjust. You definitely, for me, it's, you get a little anxious, you know what I mean? I definitely, as I get older, I get a little anxious since I become a father. I felt the pressure of that a little bit in a good way. But, like you did, I've had to change, the ways, and I'm not doing boys' weekends or boys' trips and things like that. It's we're doing things as a family, and I love it. We travel together a lot, and we're constantly, if I'm on a work trip, we all go together. Or if Juliana has a trip, we go together. And I think it's made us stronger as a result of that. And it's certainly good for our son. He's an only child. So, we struggle with a little bit of that, the guilt, like he doesn't have any siblings. And, this was God's plan though. And I think you talked about surrendering, and that's what I do a lot. And the more I do it, the more at peace I am. You know what I mean? Like, God, if this is, what you want for me, then I got to live with it, and I believe in a higher power. Everyone has their own version of who that is. Yeah. For me, I think that there is someone bigger than I am, and I surrender to that God, and hopefully He'll guide me, and I know He will. And He's never let me down so far. Oftentimes you ask where the why is, though, right? When you're going through those hard times, why? And, eventually you figure out the why. I remember when Juliana and I were having trouble having a baby, we were like praying one night, like, why, God? We're good parents. We're going to be great. We're going to, we're hardworking, and we're going to be able to provide a great home. We didn't understand the why. Well, it turns out that along our journey, and we were going through IVF and all these different, ways to try to have a child, we discovered that Juliana had breast cancer. And long story short, after they had done all the surgeries and all the, treatments, her breast cancer was what's called estrogen positive. So had she been able to get pregnant, right, at the time when she was 36, it would have fueled that cancer, because when you get pregnant, your body just blows up with estrogen. And we later figured out the why, but we were so angry at God, and we didn't understand, and we were, why us? Like, why is this happening to us? Well, as I joked to Juliana when our son was born, I said, he's going to be able to get away with a lot of mischief, because, whenever he gets into trouble, he's going to say, Mom, I saved your life, because he really did. And I think being able to be patient and surrender and not necessarily expect to figure out what the why is in the present moment, I think is very hard to do, but it's important to do.
Yeah. And I love how you talked about surrender. And I think that as an entrepreneur, as a man, surrender is a hard one to wrap your head around, especially as you're younger, right? But I think as we become more conscious about the why, right? The why we're here, right? And everybody has their own version about why they're here. It becomes so important to embrace that notion of surrender. And it's hard,
hard.
right?
Yeah.
Because we want to control.
Yeah.
Control feels good,
Yeah.
but in a lot of ways, it's this false sense of security, and we're not controlling shit. We just think we are.
Right. That's right.
But it's you know, it's surrender to just allowing things to unfold as they are, and to look when there is hardship, right? It's hard to look back and say, well, what was that for? Generally, we don't learn much when things are going really well.
No.
We think we're causing
the
all the
comfort
good
zone.
shit that's happening, right? It's on us. We're smart.
Yeah.
We're smarter than everyone else. We outwork everyone. And there are these stories we tell ourselves about why things are happening, right? But a lot of times things are out of our control.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, we have some agency over it without question, but I appreciate that you brought that surrender piece up, because again, as men, I don't think it's almost like a dirty word in some ways.
Well, it goes against the way we were raised for the most part, especially our generation. You don't surrender. Boys don't cry. You know what I mean? You're not allowed to show your emotions.
No.
I mean, that's just how it was when we were growing up.
For sure.
I mean, at least where growing up in Chicago, it was, that was not part of the program.
Yeah, and shit, small town Maine, the old man, he wasn't putting up with any of that girly stuff.
Right, that's right.
But it's interesting. I was, or at least I find it interesting. I was on a retreat in South Africa this summer.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was with some guys who had achieved a lot, right? And it was a group of 6 of us, and the word content came up, and I think for me, I had gotten to a place where I had felt so connected to my family and to myself and how I could show up for those in my life, right? Family, friends, strangers, because I had gotten to that point where I was really content. I just felt joy. And I had bits and pieces of it. And so I had asked one of the guys, he was kind of a hard charging guy and from Silicon Valley and done a lot of really cool things. And I'm like, what does content feel like to you? Because he was thinking about, his boys were like 7 and 8, and he's like, maybe we'll just take the next 10 years, go live in New Zealand and have an experience. I'm like, okay, so what's keeping you from that? Like what?
I like that idea.
Right. And he was this notion that being content, right, was settling, was giving up, and I mean, everybody has their own definition of what content means, and I think I probably would have said the same thing 5 years ago, but I look at him, right, as a guy who had plenty of means and who professed his deep love for his family, like in articulating that this was a real option, but really struggling with it. And I could just see the struggle being because he wasn't creating something that was going to be a successful entrepreneurial deal, which is part of his essence as well. But it's like, I was trying to explain, but you're not getting those 10 years back.
You're not, man.
So you've planted the seed, brother.
Yeah.
Like,
that's it.
What happens, right, if in 10 years, this thing you're doing, right, this new project blows up and is successful, okay? And you make all this money and like.
Now what? Kids are 17.
Yeah.
They're gone.
And it's like, I just wanted to put the mirror up like, brother, like you're at least considering this. Like, I want you to really consider what it would look like in 10 years if you chose both paths. And the path with the business is like, you hit it out of the park. Yeah. Like, really play that one up, okay? And what's that money? And sure, there's some accomplishment and feeling like you created something, but is that money going to be able to replace that for you?
Well, and it sounds like it's not going to have a material impact on the guy's life.
No.
I mean, it's, you know what I mean? So that's crazy. Yeah, and that's unfortunate for his kids.
Yeah, so I'm hoping, I'm hoping that that's that little nugget, that little seed I put in there will maybe shift him. But one thing I was thinking about in the lead up to us sitting down was I know you do a lot of public speaking, and I'm curious, like what if you could just kind of distill it down, what the general message is, right? And I know it varies from group to group, but kind of what it looks like right now, and what maybe it might look like in 5 years, You know, if you could really, what you would want to experience in the next 5 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then have that be what you're sharing with these men and women.
Yeah, so I do a lot of speaking, you know, mostly to a lot of sales teams, small business groups, you know, you name it. And for me, it's really about business, you know, and it's about how to achieve your goals in business and, you know, some of the things that have worked for me and some of the things that, you know, cause failure for me. So I love to talk about what not to do, because I think so many people just get up there and a lot of these speakers and, you know, they write great books, but, you know, they've never talked about when they've fallen down or what are mistakes that they've made that they've learned from to become better, you know, at their craft. And the one thing I've learned, you know, the hard way is that, you know, I always say you have to think like a conductor. And what I mean is you have to think like the conductor of an orchestra. And the conductor of an orchestra has all these expert musicians in his or her pit, and they play their instruments to absolute perfection. Now, the conductor himself or herself is not an expert at playing each and every one of those instruments, but he gets them to play perfect music and harmony together. And in business, the ones who are in that rare air, they have that mindset. You know, they check their egos at the door and they don't try to play every single instrument because the music won't sound so good. And, you know, at least from the people that I've dealt with over the years, and I've met some of the greatest entrepreneurs our country has ever, you know, seen. That's the one takeaway that I've found is that, you know, they find the best people who can help them with social media or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
And they surround themselves around people who are smarter than they are. And he gets them all to play their music in perfect harmony. And that's the one thing that I've learned. And I really learned that kind of the hard way. I learned that from doing a lot of people watching. You know, I think you can learn so much good and bad from people watching. And, you know, when you can learn from what you don't want to look like in your life, and also what you want to look like. And as I said this earlier, a lot of people want to look like Cal. You know, you don't hear this, but I hear it from, because we live in a community together for 4 months a year. And a lot of people are, you know, they want to be like you.
What's so funny too, right? Think back 2 years ago, right?
Right.
Who wants to really look like that? And that's
the facade though.
Right.
Yeah. You know,
So
they're on your Instagram and
yeah.
But I think more so, I think there's a certain authenticity to you. And I think people can see that right away. And there's something about that where a lot of people that we meet, you know, right away that it's just a facade or a sham. And I think people feel like they can talk to you and get, you know, real guidance and real advice. And I think that's a real gift that you've been given, because there aren't many people who have that kind of energy that you have. And I think, right, you'd agree, Ben. Ben's in the room
Thank
here.
you.
And
This is a paid
you hear the
advertising.
same thing that I hear, right? I mean, everyone, right? I mean, that's just not, it's common knowledge. But so that's one thing. I think it's important to think like a conductor. It's important to check your ego at the door. And I think a lot of people let their egos get in the way, and that really stunts their growth. You know, they want to feel important, and they want to beat their chest, and, you know, they want to be able to be the person that everyone comes to when there's a problem. And, you know, that's great, but you're never going to really get to where you want to go. And this just isn't in business. I think this is in every aspect of your life. You know, you can't do it alone. And fortunately, you know, I'm in a lot of different businesses, right? And I keep going back to business, but we're in the restaurant business, we're in the wine business, we're in the clothing business. And, you know, I never knew anything about the restaurant business, but I found the best guy in the country that is.
Fact.
I don't know anything about the wine business, but I found one of the best families in the United States that imports Italian wine, and I partner with them. And you find people who are really good at their craft, right? And this translates into other aspects of your life, right? Whether it's with family or your friendships, you know, you want to be able to make sure that you are able to get good guidance and good advice, and you want to surround yourself around people who are going to tell it to you straight. Because, you know, I think the higher you get in life, and I hate using this, but the more people are going to just tell you what you want to hear.
It's interesting you bring that up, because that was something I want to ask you, like where you're at now, right? You're obviously, people know who you are, right? And so how hard is it for you, right, to have someone look in the eye and say, Bill, you're fucking this up?
I love that. I mean, those are the people that I want to have in my life, right? And I want to have people that are going to tell it to me straight, you know, whether it's good or bad. And unfortunately, that's just a fact of life. You know, when you no matter what it is, whether it's any industry you're in, if you're a teacher, if you're a coach, the higher you get up in the ranks, the more people are just gonna, tell you what you want to hear. And those aren't the people you necessarily want around you in your life. And there's also, you have to realize there's a lot of people that are in your life that are not happy for your success, right? So I always say, you have to be careful, because an interesting study I read, it said the majority of the people we come into contact with on a daily basis are negative. Now, the study went on to say that you're never going to be able to, get these people out of your life entirely. But when you're aware of who they are and what their intentions are, you negate their power, right? So when you're doing great things like you're doing, when you're, shifting gears and realizing that there's more to life than just chasing, the career or whatever it is, there's always going to be those people who are jealous, who are envious, who wish they had the courage and, the bravery that you have. So what they do is they try to pull you down in order to build themselves up, right? And those are the people you have to be careful of.
How about this? Since I don't know if many of the folks in my audience have been to any of your speaking engagements, would you mind sharing maybe one great thing or one thing you learned from someone you worked with that was how you want to be, and then something that you learned about how you, and you don't have to name names, but just throw us through a few bones here about your lessons.
So I think, one common theme around the top 10 people that I've met who have been top of their industry, I think the one trait they all have in common, they all have different personalities completely, is that they're all good decision makers. And most people go through life and they're indecisive. They have one foot on the pier and one foot on the boat, and they don't know whether to go out to sea or they don't know whether to stay on land, right? And they let these opportunities pass them by. The people who are in that rare air, they educate themselves and they recognize opportunities and they take advantage of those opportunities before they pass them by. When you have that analysis paralysis, right, it can be really damaging, because you get to the end of your career and you look back and you have tremendous regret because you never did anything, because you let fear paralyze you. And it's just interesting, I don't know if you knew this, but when we're born into this world, we're only born with two natural fears, right? It's the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. And every other fear we have is learned.
Know that.
And so many people are afraid they're going to fail. They're afraid they're going to make a mistake. They're afraid what their colleagues are going to say, that they never even try. And ultimately, that's the biggest failure of them all, is not trying. So I think being a good decision maker, I think, is very important. And then as far as failures or what not to do, I think it's the power of potential. I always say, potential is probably the best God-given asset we have, and it's the most underutilized. And I really believe that when we're born, we're given a certain amount of currency in the form of potential, and it's up to us to make it grow, and it's up to us to make it multiply. But so many of us don't do anything with it because we let other people tell us what we can and cannot do, right? We believe them, right? They say, Cal, you can't start a podcast. You were a traitor, and you're going to let those people tell you whether you can or cannot do it. And I want to share with you this story. So I got to work a little bit with Joan Rivers on The Apprentice for a couple of seasons. She and I were guest judges a couple episodes, and my wife worked with her for 12 years on a show called Fashion Police. So I got to know her over the years. And she passed away a few years ago. And she truly exemplified the power of potential, and I'll tell you why. So after her funeral, she had this funeral in New York City. It was unbelievable. It was like the funniest funeral you'll ever attend in your life. And after the funeral, about 100 of us were invited back to her apartment on Fifth Avenue. And we're at the apartment, and I noticed that about 80 of the 100 people there all had these little stick pins on their lapel, and they were of a bumblebee. And I turned to Julianne and I said, "Hey, what's with all the bumblebees?" She goes, "I don't know. Joan always, said that she was like a bumblebee." And I didn't think anything of it, and we stayed for another hour or so, and we left. And the back of my mind, I was still thinking about Joan and the bumblebee. So we got back to our hotel room, and I Googled bumblebee. And as soon as I hit enter, the first thing that popped up, I got it. You see, when you Google bumblebee, the first thing that comes up is that the bumblebee, by all reasonable laws of physics, was never meant to fly. Its wing-to-weight ratio should prohibit it from ever getting liftoff from the ground. But no one ever told the bee that, and the bee flies. You see, Joan was the bumblebee because she didn't let people tell her whether she could or could not fly. They all said, Joan, you can't host a late night TV show. You're a woman. She did it. They said, you can't sell $100 million a year with a jewelry on the Home Shopping Network. She did it. She didn't let people put limitations on what she could or could not do. And I think ultimately that's why people fail.
That's beautiful. I got goosebumps, brother. Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. So in wrapping this up, what I like to ask my guests is, what is something, how are you working in, what are you doing, right? Another way to say that is, what are you doing to create balance in your life? How do you pull back from the doing, right? I think it's a very kind of masculine energy is to be doing and creating in that sense. Like, how are you pulling back and creating balance within your life?
To be honest, it's a work in progress because, I went from, 100 miles an hour to, 20.
Yeah.
So I'm still figuring that out. You know what I mean? And it's a fine line, and I'm growing and I'm learning and, talking to guys like you and getting advice, from people who are in a very similar situation, and not being afraid to ask for help. I think that's something that I've learned over these last few years, is that it's okay to ask for help. It's actually something that you have to do in life if you want to, look back and have total fulfillment, because you can't do it alone. So I'm figuring it out, I'm certainly, trying to do more to make a difference. They say, if you want to be happy, make someone else happy. And I really find a lot of joy in being able to help other people. I've been to Haiti a bunch of times and done a bunch of mission trips down there. And, that's kind of my boys' trip. So I get, 5 or 10 of my buddies, and we go down to Haiti and we build houses for, 4 or 5 days. And it's pretty cool, to be able to, you think you're changing someone's life, but actually your life is the one that's getting changed in the end. So, it's a fine line, and I'm probably going to be fine tuning it for many, many years to come. I think it's something that always is requiring adjustment. It's like a trim on an airplane. You're always having to try to adjust it and to get that level flight. And you might get an hour of level flight, but then you gotta, you're going to hit different types of air, and you gotta recalibrate a little bit.
Yeah, and I agree. It's a moving target, right? And it changes from day to day, week to week. And I will say that, and I pointed this out to you this summer, when you walk the loop with your shirt off, that is a great way to do that. You get the sun on your skin. Yeah. I told you this very.
You can't tone it, you tan it.
That's not exactly. Sure, we'll go with that. And so anyway, tell the people where they can find you.
You can go to billrancic.com.
How about that?
Yeah, that's pretty easy.
That's simple. Yeah. Well, brother, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you so much for doing this.
It
was a long time in the making, and I appreciate your candor and honesty, and thanks for showing up.
My pleasure. Thank you.